Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Demystifying Business. We are, unfortunately, quite a few thousand kilometers away from each other, but I'm still honored to be joined by Desmond Latham. We are talking about demystifying the business of media. You can see his profile below in the bio, but maybe, Desmond, if you can give us a brief overview of your track record in the media space.
Sure. I started as a cadet in 1985 in South Africa in a radio station. I then joined full-time. I was the so-called township reporter, speaking local languages, war reporting, some people would call it. I spent many years covering things such as the Southwest African, Namibian independence story. I flew around Africa doing stories. I got a bursary to study in America. I came back from there from Stanford University after a year at the Night Fellowship program. And then I started a journalism school here called Allenby Campus, Midrand Campus, and we're part of the Boston House. They're certified. And then I was hired to do strategic advice for radio stations here, running newsrooms, which I did. And then I worked at Avusa then, which is the Sunday Times brand, Financial Mail and Financial Times and Business Day of South Africa, and ran a radio networked business where we sold programs around Southern Africa for commercial radio stations. From there, I started my own company, which I ran for 10 years. And then I went back to media full-time as a consultant in the mobile space, having learned a lot running my own mobile business, application business. And then sorry, hang on a second. Hold on a moment. Sorry, someone is. Okay, so I'll just get it from there. Yeah, and then after 10 years of running my mobile business, I was hired as a consultant at the Sunday Times newspaper on mobile, doing application design and so on. And from there, I became online editor at Business Day and Financial Mail newspapers, multimedia editor. I moved into television. I was a news editor in Business Day TV, which is a cable network across the world. And then my wife, who's actually started her own company, said to me, come on, you're making money for these corporates, come make money, back money for us as an entrepreneur. So I went to work for Frames Media, which is owned by my wife. So I work for her actually, which is quite a nice change of, it flips the logic. And she does training and media content around Africa largely, but we do work in Europe and in Southeast Asia. And then the government, actually, with the changes here with some of the leadership, asked me to go in and work with them on digital side. So I was contracted to government for a year as a chief director of their main communication system called GCIS, Government Communication Information System. And I ran all these social media accounts and I made some changes, launched new products with them, and ran a newspaper as well as magazine. I was what's known as the editor-in-chief of government or chief director of GCIS. So it was a very big position for me and unusual because I'm completely non-government in my background. And now I'm back at Frames Media working with my wife again. So that's the long story.
And, you know, media is such a wide word, especially in this day and age. It means so much versus maybe what it meant back in the days. What is your, if somebody said, explain media to them, explain this world in which we're moving, and you've got experiences from many different dishes of life. How would you explain media to them?
I think that's information that entertains and informs, that is in multiple formats, such as video, audio, and text. And it's an experience. So that's the kind of phrase I'd use in a shortened way. So it's moved on substantially from the kind of concept of mass media, which each of these things I think is rooted historically in a phrase that then is kind of set. The meaning is set, and the meanings that we have in media presently is changed and it's constantly changing. So for many people in the world that you've talked about this, your media is actually data. It's about small spurts of data that feeds the idea of what's behind it to a group. So it could be they like moving pictures, or they like to go to watch something. So that's become media, I think, is the data interwoven into a form of entertainment and information that we gather mainly digitally now.
And I think you've raised a beautiful point in that description, which is that media is there to entertain and inform. And I meet a lot of entrepreneurs around the world, through my work, and most of them are so focused on the technology to deliver that they almost forget what it's supposed to bring out. So it almost sounds like we are rushing to build cars without looking at where the car is taking us. What are the opportunities in this world? What are, that's an open-ended question, kind of, where is the money to be made, especially if you're not a large conglomerate, where you are like you were many years ago when you started, you were three of you, you jumped in it and you found a niche, sold it, and grew it.
You know, many corporates and companies and publishers are asking themselves that question. And I'm afraid to say that you've asked a profound question, because what has happened is people are using information and the gathering of information in a niched way and in a packaged way without caring about the outcome and effect. So it's all about capital return and return on investment. And information is a high value source. It comes from Gutenberg, really, where mass information is accessible to mass people. But behind it is a responsibility. And this is forgotten now. So one of the gatekeepers of the past was an editor. So for instance, would make a decision about the kind of information based on law. They would know that you can't take pictures of young kids naked and put on the front cover of a newspaper. And the way that the business model now works is that what is preferred by some people who entertain themselves with the idea of making a profit, ROI, the return on the investment. So many of these people, I think, have lost touch with the basis, the core, what it is to be ethical. I think that's a fundamental problem that we face. So that's on the one side. So there's this careless attitude about, well, if people want it, they should know that if it's bad or good. So let them tick a big box that says we agree to all sorts of things. But the fine print is going to be so heinous, we know them, they'll never read it. But it's damaging to them, but they don't care because they don't know. And we're not going to do anything bad with that information, are we? So we're all happy here. That is an indictment, I think, of places like Facebook, especially at the moment, and others, who are using purely a return on investment to obfuscate the fact that they're feeding and allowing information to be fed that is damaging to society. So I think that's on the one side. And I don't want to be sanctimonious, because, but I do want to point out that at one stage running my company, I was offered a shares in a company that ended up being sold for nearly £1 billion, which is about 150 million euros. At the time, it was worth a lot more, to allow children to access content in mobiles using a system that allowed them to listen to an ad, and if they replied to ad, they get free airtime. So this company bypassed their parents to allow children to listen to something and receive something, and I balked at the last minute. When I asked for the business model, they said it was 13 to 25-year-olds. I said, no, we need 18 upwards. We can't do that. So when I'm sanctimonious about this, even at that stage, with all the profits we're making, there's a limit to what you can do. So I think you need to know, when you ask that media question, that's a fundamental thing, because that's the part of the answer. Part of the answer is I need to get blocks of people to which I can attract to content through means that they're not always aware of the effect it has on their human rights. So I think that's the answer. The answer is you need to package information more profoundly and target it more profoundly. However, that's also the weakness in an ethical basis. So I think it's a question that people who are designing media don't want to think about, because they're thinking about the cost to build it and the return on the investment. They don't really care if they're using an Uber model that says, you know, I'm going to track you around and your friends, even when they're off the app, because I'm going to make money. And in the end, you know, people who make a lot of money are by nature, you know, the rulers of the world. So we must be doing something right, because we're not socialists, are we? You know, we're not Marxists. So we must be good, because those guys are bad. So there's this trade-off pattern that happens. And with media, it's even worse, news media, because the principles underlying it are, is it true? Can I verify the information? What effect does it have? Why am I doing it? And with the globalization of information flow, all those questions are out the window now. The questions that people who are launching media products are thinking now is, how many people can I expose it to? How can I get them to click more regularly on that media? How can I spy on their day-to-day patterns of behavior online so I can trick them into using my content more effectively? Look, it's in their favor. And therefore, I can sell my ads at a higher rate, because I'm getting response rates that higher, because I understand exactly how York Zucchi and Des Latham operate. So I can feed them information that's profoundly more for them. And some of them is going to be borderline, but that's what they want. So I'm going to give it to them. It's free speech after all. So I think we're living in a moment of contradiction with that question.
And you raise a very good point on that. And I wonder, is there an emergence for, or is there an emergence in demand for, let's call it, ethical business models or ethical service providers? Can somebody with a conscience, with an ethics, with a, let's say, a slightly less materialistic approach to winning life's race, can they make it in this modern world?
Brilliant question. The answer is yes, and it's happening already. What has happened is, I've always believed that this would, because thinking people eventually are suspicious when something is too easy. If it's too easy, if it's too glib, if it's too flashy, too much bling, there's something wrong, eventually, deep down, people begin to understand, okay, the more experience they have in life, the more they realize that the easy win is not the win at all, that there's some loss being taken here. There's no free lunch. So why is it free? Where's the lunch? So I think over time that's happened to people. So what has happened in world news media is advocacy. So the Gates Foundation in Africa is funding investigative journalism into health. So they're looking at the value chain behind that and so on. And then they have a hands-off approach, like the old-fashioned owners of these newspapers used to have, where they would say, okay, I'm putting $1 million into your publisher because you know how to publish. Just give me some money back. But if I'm getting inflation plus 5%, I'm happy. I'm not trying to get rich quick off you, because I think what you're doing is really important to get information that's accurate to the majority of people to make a decision that's thoughtful. You know, one of the things the Nazis did in the 30s is to crush, and Stalin and so on, every fundamentalist organization or country or dictator crushes free flow of information and tweaks it towards their own end. So these things are with us today. They're not that long ago. They had electricity back then. They had newspapers. And all you to do is look for a principle that includes make a good living. But many media people know in the news media, you're not in this business because you're going to get rich. Forget it. You're in this business because you're going to take down a dictator. And if you have that understanding, then people who invest in those principles know that they're going to go to sleep easy at night, and that you and I will have information we otherwise not get. And nogal, as well, it's going to be accurate. Accurate, timeous, valid, relevant. The question I get back at me when people say, yeah, but that sounds like you want to be beholden, you want to hold me to the information that you may not, I may not know is true or not, and you want to be a gatekeeper of information. This is freedom. We're taking all your power away as media people. We have the power. The problem with that logic, and it's a profound problem, is that accuracy is not easy to achieve. You have to think like a lawyer as a journalist. And people do not do that on social media. They share stuff that's 5 years old and pretend it's relevant to the immediate. And I think that because it's valued through an echo chamber of emotion, that they feel that it must be right, they then self-righteously tell you that, well, it could have happened, so I'm just sharing it with you anyway, because we all know that. So advocacy-based journalism in Southern Africa is making a big waves here, because power networks can't get to people who indulge in that. You know, you find that corporates can't scratch away at it. You find that governments can't undermine it. They're kind of free. Journalists are working in that sector. So that's happening a lot. It's happening in Germany. It's happening in Switzerland. It's happening in America. So people are now funding experiments. The thing that concerns us, I think, about information is the bias that's crept in. And it's not just crept in, it's kind of run in the last few years. America is a good case in that, where the Washington Post, for example, the New York Times, if you look at their front pages now compared to 15 years ago, I'm constantly stunned and amazed how biased that material is. Ditto if you read Wall Street Journal's editorial. You know, it's very pro-Republican media. The virtual civil war that's going on in social consciousness in America, which still leads the world in terms of freedom of speech concept, has actually become a damage. It's a damage to our ability to fathom information properly. So even these entities, which make a living off supposedly verified information, have major issues politically. So the advocacy-based information patterns that are emerging are really exciting to us, firstly. Secondly, crowdsourcing. You know, I trained Syrian, Jordanian, Egyptian women in Alexandria in Egypt 2 years ago. Two of the women were in the Syrian civil war. They were reporting from inside Syria. You know that some of their reporting was being funded from America by individuals who were putting $5 into a kitty, allowing them to report on what is actually happening in their town. That is a true principle to end this long spiel from me. Is a true principle about your question about the future of media. That is one of the ways in which we can independently cover material, expose it to the majority of people in the world, and have an effect that is verifiable, attributable, accurate, and principled, I think we have to say.
And in that, it's such powerful things you're saying, because you are actually giving practical, hands-on, what can I do tomorrow morning advice to people listening. It's not, hey, try to raise 100 million, whatever currency, build a platform, develop algorithm, and so forth. It's what is your passion? What speaks true to your heart? Go out and make a name and a following. And on that following, can you build a business model? Is today the lone voice, is there still a place for the lone authentic voice? Or is the advice you would give, and I don't mean it just journalists or radio host but anybody going into the space, if you were to shake York, who wants to go into this media, what advice would you give him?
Start now, practice with blogs, become focus on exactly what it is that you obsess about, whatever it is in your life that you have a need to communicate deep down. Don't do it because you think someone else is going to buy it. I think we're at that point now, as you said, where individuals, the concept of building algorithms to go sell is passé. I think it's finished, because off the shelf cloud is all taking over this pattern. I don't think you can make a living anymore like the Alphabet folks, the Google folks, when they started. And say, okay, I've created this algorithm, it's beautiful, it's AI. I think it's got to, the patterns that are emerging now is on the information side, and you're dealing with, in principle, individual and smaller groups of people who are trying to make a change around them. So that means action and direct communication methodology. On the other side is AI working with technology, and that's a whole nother baby. So in the middle, the old school thing is saying, I'm going to build an algorithm, I'm going to launch something that is a curator of information and then sell to a broad mass of people by tracking them and their actions online, I think it's done for. I think it's had its day. It's still working and people are making billions off it now. But if you're going to build a future business 5 or 10 years hence, you'll need to show at some point, majority of people in the world are going to stop buying the information because their friends are buying it. They're going to start thinking about why it is that they want to buy it, whatever that is. And we're still in the phase now where people are like lemmings in a way. Everyone's on Instagram, everyone's going to Snapchat, everyone's doing Google, everyone's using Amazon, all these big companies. And I had a discussion with someone a few years ago about this. They said to me, it's a revolution. I said, no, it's not. It's just going to reinforce a handful of people's control over millions of others. And in the old days, they used to do it off food delivery, or they do it off owning the train lines and the railways, or they do it off managing and owning the banks. And this is not a conspiracy theory. This is the reality. So we're in an industrial economic phase where people who control the algorithmic outputs are not going to allow you and I as entrepreneurs into their patch. Then, Amazon faces a major challenge in the future when, with eBay and others, trying to compete over the purchasing of real products. And the purchasing of real information is like the purchasing of real product. So I think that we've got to move away from that. So I've hired 15 developers. I was doing that in the 90s to 2008, but that was blue sky new. It's 12 years later. No, it's almost 2 decades. It's a generation almost later. And we're still trying to think, let's pool these developers with this great algorithm, this thing I'm going to sell. I think it's done for. Now, I think what you asked the question is, I think I can make this information, which is important for those people to get now, more relevant to them. That's the core heart of it. And who is going to respond to that is you and I as individuals. Do we trust that information? Will we go and buy more from it? Wall Street Journal had a paywall from the first days. They never changed that. Financial Times dabbled at early days with a little bit of free, but now it's paywall. You can get a handful of articles, for example. So the future is, you want information, it's not for free. So if you burrow a little further into that, the logic is there's no free lunch. I need you to buy something from me because it's valuable. The internet revolution logic here was to offset the establishment at the time and say to people, you know, these guys that make you buy newspapers, made them rich and it made politicians what they are. It's biased. You can all be media people. That's the second phase. That's gone now. Now we enter the third phase, which is, you know, these media people, some of them actually know what they're talking about. And I got hurt because I didn't listen. And I'm willing to buy that information at a low rate of $1 a month. I think that's, and you asked about media, I think that's the future of media. The free to air stuff, the advocacy based, is going to have principles, and people are networking already. There's a group called CrowdTangle, which I'm part of. It's a worldwide journalism group. And all we do is we follow social media and we test and attribute information with each other. We see how valuable it is. It's with something called CrossCheck International, which it started in Harvard. And there are thousands of journalists from Brazil to India, all languages, many cultures. We plug into the system now and we share false information with each other. And we're talking about how to respond to it internationally. So you can see there's a real move, a shift. I'm talking about a community, not about a commodity. There's a community of needs when people realize if we play with this thing, we end up with a world war. Because my analogy to the 30s was for a reason. When you switch off people's logic function and you switch on the emotion function, and then you design a biased response to threats, you can run entire people's responses to those threats, and you can create a contradictory environment where people fight. And that's what we had with the open internet. So even though I rode the first tsunami of open internet, I made money out of it, millions of dollars maybe. I realize now that the logic of offering something for nothing is twisted and warped. No one has ever got anything for nothing, ever. Not even religion. You have to have a payment principle of some sort.
I absolutely love your words. And if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is, or the advice that say you're giving to people who are interested in the space is, one, find your voice, be true to yourself. And second, stop thinking about the multi-billion company model, which anyway, based on our research and looking at entrepreneurship, those are the outliers. And so to make your life miserable in trying to achieve what only a very few percentiles can actually achieve, rather be Desmond, be York, find the voice, find the topic you're passionate about, and slowly, baby steps, build your little empire, whatever it is. So there are opportunities. So the world is full of little windows of opportunities for entrepreneurs to come into it. I think that's such a positive message.
It is. And I think that at the bottom of that is the billing models, which didn't exist 10 years ago. We have so many billing models now available to us that we can make money out of PayPal, crowdsourced funding, our own way of eliciting funds. Advocacy-based, as I said, is one of the profound ways that is happening around the world, where people are making a living out of it and changing the world. So underneath all of the things we're speaking about, the entertainment ethos and so on, is what do you want to do with that information media company that you want to start? Everything you say is true about the, know who you are, your voice, your personal voice. But I think you've got to have that goal, that 5-year goal that says, what do you want to do? Do you want to buy a Maserati? Don't do media. It's done. You want to stop people from killing themselves through smoking. This is how you can start a process to do that. Or if you want to proselytize in a nice way without being demeaning or self-righteous and so on, make a change. I think that's where media came from. That's why Gutenberg produced the multi-Bible. He was tired of the old monks sitting in their castles, their monasteries rather, writing out the Bible by hand, and then the priests in Latin speaking to these people in Germany who actually spoke a form of German at the time, were going, well, it sounds good. And that was the logic. Break down the doors and allow your voice around you and the people around you. I think it's really a localized ethos, much more than that we are now in the third phase of this process. It's much more localized than just globalized.
I love that localization aspect, and I want to end this fantastic interview, at least for me, in that I deal with a lot of entrepreneurs who are on the fringes of society, whether then the favelas of Rio or whether, like you were a journalist back then, in the townships of South Africa. Those who, when I say fringes, I don't mean poverty or stupidity or anything like that. I mean, they don't have access to the networks that you or I may have. How relevant is the advice that you gave? If you could be in front of them in the township of Diepsloot and speak to a bunch of young people, what kind of advice would you give them?
It's a brilliant question. I mean, I train local media owners, Association of Independent Publishers, which are black publishers, own 2-3 person newspapers mainly, bizarrely, and they reach 22 million South Africans through these free sheets that they operate. And one of those sections we did was monetization, which is exactly that question. And it's not an easy answer because it's tool and skills based. So I try to impress, and we all try to impress the self-help knowledge ethos, which says, learn how to code HTML. Learn what FTP means. Do not obfuscate the understanding and mythologize the understanding by hiring the developer to tell you how it works. Go and learn the principles of it. You know, there's www3, which is free. It teaches you how to do JavaScript, HTML for free. You can learn how to code. You don't have to use the code, but you know how it works. When you're going to be a motor racer, you better open that bonnet and look at under the engine, look at the engine of the car. You don't have to be the mechanic, but Lewis Hamilton and Michael Schumacher knew exactly how their engines work. So that's the point I think we try and get across to people in the favelas and the poor areas is it's maths and science, which again alienates the majority of poor people because they're not trained in maths and science. They're trained in the softer arts, speaking, voice, English, Zulu, whatever it is. So that's the big message is break down the jargon mythology around you of these technical systems. They all code is written mainly in English. If, but, you know, I'm a Java code writer. I learned Java code, HTML, JavaScript. I don't use it every day, but I know how fundamentally it kind of works. So when you demythologize the computer and then you try and make money out of it, it becomes an easier process of saying, okay, I think I'll focus on that part and not this part. I'm not going to buy that for a service. I'm going to buy a cloud service like Wix or Foursquare or something that gives me some basic systems. I'm not a web developer. You know, I'm going to sell a clinic, but I don't want to be beholden to a developer who's going to build a website for the clinic. I'm going to do it myself because I've learned the fundamentals of it. So I think that's the big message: is demythologize the system. Sorry. I beg your pardon. I can't put it on flight mode because we're talking.
No, but
so I think that's learn the skill, learn the basic science of it. Everything is online. Get some data. Understand what it is you're going to focus on. If it's smartphones, learn how smartphones basically work. It takes a few weeks, and then from there, design your content of the future.
And you'll be so, and I think in this day and age where literally there's no knowledge that isn't available in some shape or form online, I think this is an age of democratization on steroids. Nobody, and I understand the practical reality of not having access to data, but there are hotspots, there are. So if there's one message that I'm getting from you is go and get yourself empowered, go and learn, and then you'll have a higher knowledge base from which to make a decision on what to pursue.
Yes, and the point is, it's really important what you're saying, and don't stop. It's ongoing. Personal growth and education in this field, digital field especially, it's ongoing. You can't say, oh, I'm now a C+ developer. You've got to say, I've learned the latest in the last week. That's the other big message. It's ongoing.
Desmond, thank you so much for your insight, and I hope you entrepreneurs watching out there will get inspiration. The trick, start tomorrow. The world is your oyster. Thank you for watching.